Hello and welcome to Minter Dialogue, episode number 307. Today is Sunday the 16th of December 2018. And first a quick shout out and thanks to Kenneth for his podcast review on iTunes. I'd love it if you'd all consider dropping in your rating too. And just before introducing my next guest, I also want to point out that I'm happy to feature your questions. For this purpose, I've set up a specific email, nminterdial@gmail.com, to which you can send me an audio file and your question, and I'll endeavour to answer it on the following podcast. On to my guest, who is Nafez Dakkak, CEO of the London office of the Queen Rania Foundation for Education and Development. As CEO, Nafez led the team behind Edraak.org, an online learning initiative, or MOOC, of the Queen Rania Foundation, and he's currently the executive chairman. Edraak serves over 1 million learners across the Arab world for K-12 as well as continuous learning. Through its partnership with edX, the Edraak platform provides courses in Arabic taught and developed at the top-tier institutions such as HarvardX, MITX, and UC BerkelyX. In this conversation with Nafez, we learn about this fascinating personal journey. We look at how Edraak came to be, its curriculum and business model, how it has grown, and the challenges for the future of this important initiative. Welcome to the Minter Dialogue podcast, where we discuss branding and all things digital. I am Minter Dial, your host, and you'll find the show notes on my eponymous site, minterdial.com. Enjoy the show. Nafez Dakkak, great to have you on the show. You and I share an alma mater in the United States, up in New Haven, and we also share a friend, and that is how we met. And I was interested to hear about your project. You're the executive chairman of Edraak. You're also the CEO of QRF UK. So you're going to get to explain all of that. Tell us, Nafez, just to begin with, who you are and what's your background.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll start maybe sort of just talking generally and try to provide a bit more context. I've always sort of been interested in education. The reason I've gone into education is I'm excited about tapping into the potential of people. And I think the way, sort of maybe something we discussed often at our alma mater, is education is sort of a method to empowerment, and sort of looking at sort of my part of the world, the Arab world or the Middle East, that's been something that's always sort of, I guess, bothered me, or something I wanted to create an impact on. So I started off in consulting, but sort of quickly moved to work for the Queen Rania Foundation, and that's sort of where, under sort of the vision and auspices of Her Majesty, we kicked off Edraak, which is today the largest online learning platform, open, free for Arabic-speaking learners across the region. Sort of spent around, I'd say, to keep it short, 5 years doing that, and now I've transitioned to the board, and I now run the London office of the Queen Rania Foundation. And to maybe give it more context about the foundation, to keep it very short, we try to find what works in education and then think about scaling it. Perhaps the most salient question, given everything we hear in the news about the refugee crisis and the recent global monitoring report that came out today on refugee learning, or just education in general, but looking at refugee learning, the quintessential question we're trying to answer is, if you have a refugee child that's missed X years of schooling, how do you get her back up to speed in sort of X over 2, X over 3, to make sure she's well integrated back into the public education system and learning with her peers, and how do we tap into that latent potential?
Cool. So the fact that you went to Yale as a Palestinian, this notion of educating Arabs, or in Arabic anyway, is something that you might hear in circles saying, well, education is the key. And, there's talk about, educating women. If you're an educated woman means 10 educated or better, or, some statistic about how educating women is also a great thing. To what extent is that part of the narrative, and is that maybe part of the motivation to have accessible, good quality education?
I'd say sort of there are two parts of that. Part of it is sort of, I guess, personal narratives, growing up, and ironically, maybe this is sort of something I wrote my Yale essay about, the value of education to a Palestinian family. You grow up, there's this, your parents constantly, going by, as a Palestinian, you've lost everything, sort of kind of a refugee. The only thing you can hold on to is your education, your learning. The only way to make the world a better place is to work hard and get educated. And then at some point in time, you realize, I can't do this alone. So if me being educated isn't enough, then how do I get as many people in the region as educated as possible. So that's sort of the personal narrative that I have into this. And then when we sort of talk about Edraak, which is sort of an online learning platform, if you look at the region, the demand for higher education has increased, I'd say a little over fourfold in the last sort of 4 decades. And sort of demand sort of highly, sort of quickly outstripping supply. And also I'd say the quality of the supply is sort of questionable. You obviously have maybe some sort of beacons of hope, but generally speaking, not a single university, at least on the higher education level in the top 100. You can sort of make similar arguments in K-12. So with the advent of the internet, and you have around 150 million Arabic speakers online across the region, a number that's growing at 20%, so we'll double probably in under 5 years. So a lot of that, together with the lack of access to Arabic content online, tells you there's an opportunity here to provide access in Arabic to a large number of people. The last piece of the puzzle I'd quickly add is over 70% of people in the Arab world do not speak English, or sort of not enough where they can sort of learn and consume English. So if you look at the English Proficiency Index, the Middle East, North Africa is probably the worst region. It was last year. I assume it'll be the same again in 2018. The worst region in the world in terms of English proficiency. So it's very key to make sure we provide content and resources for them in Arabic, so that they don't miss out on everything we're talking about with the sort of learning online revolution, etc.
All right, so you've got the personal story about being a refugee and then understanding how refugees get stripped out of educational system and then therefore don't feel they have access to education. There's also this notion that there's not enough English speakers because most of the content today is English. When you go about trying to create the curriculums you have on, you need to explain to us what type of offers you have. Is the curriculum going to be around certain board certifications and primary type of education for, let's say, basic Arabic, basic English, or basic maths? And then how do you select the different types of materials you want to teach?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think I'll try to answer sort of in 2 parts. First, I'll talk about sort of the higher education components. I say historically, up until the beginning of this year, Edraak, our sort of online learning platform, only offered sort of higher education, tertiary education material. We launched the K-12 segment earlier this year, and so I'll answer both separately. On the higher education segment, I'd say, we've really tried to look at demand from 2 components. One is sort of understand what employers want and what are the skills they want, and then understand what learners want and what do they feel the gap is. And this is really around trying to answer the question of currency. What is this online degree or online course certificate worth for students or learners? So we end up offering a lot of courses that might not be as intuitive, or at least not offered in public universities. So how to write a resume, how to look for a job, how to freelance, a lot of skills that are maybe sort of more, I guess, applicable and less academic. But at the same time, we try to identify gaps that employers say they'd like to see more of. So collaborative working, STEM skills, programming, etc. So I say that is on the higher education component. On the K-12 component, I think one important maybe paradigm here is thinking about not just about how do you offer a good product, but how do you offer a good program. So in the sense, whatever we offer really needs to slot in as easily as possible into the day of a busy school teacher. Mm-hmm. And again, there's sort of multiple use cases, or similar. Let's say there are 3 use cases for our K-12 program. There's sort of teachers using it in the classroom for sort of more differentiated, personalized instruction, if you want to use that buzzword. There's sort of remediation, students that sort of want to catch up, and students that are advanced, so sort of more personalized but self-directed learning. And I'd say the third use case is really for, I'd say, what we can broadly call sort of caregivers or care workers, or aid refugee workers in refugee camps that are not particularly skilled enough to maybe lead the learning process, but can guide younger learners on the process. So with that in mind, we've tried to make sure the content is as aligned as possible with curriculum, national curriculum. So right now we are working on aligning it with the Jordanian, Syrian, and Egyptian curricula, with the idea eventually to expand to other national curricula in the Arab world as funding comes on board. So we've started with mathematics, funded by Google.org, and we've recently signed an agreement with the Jack Ma Foundation in China to fund English language learning.
Neat. So that was one of my questions later about the business model, because you're not for profit, it's free education, and so the business model is essentially sponsorship.
So there, I'd say two business models. I mean, so one of the things that we're keen on is to make Edraak as sustainable as possible. And I'd say Edraak is a startup with a not-for-profit business model. Most of our revenue, and sort of we think of it as revenue, comes from business-to-business deals. So that's usually software service where we use the OpenEdX technology that we've customized and sort of airbized, and we can talk more about that, to offer it as a platform, as a service to other entities. So we've worked with the Ministry of Labor in Saudi Arabia, we've worked with the Prime Minister's office in Dubai, and worked with other governments and entities across the Middle East where we've really helped them come up with a white-labeled version of the platform. Another sort of add-on service to that software service work is sort of content development. So we do, or sort of because we've been very keen about creating the market and sort of making sure there's high quality content, we've spent a lot of time in building our in-house capacity in terms of video production, editing, etc. We have our own studios. So we do content production for these entities at a premium, sometimes hosted on their own platforms. Sometimes if it aligns with our content and they want the reach of, 2 million plus learners, will have it on our own platform. I'd say that is sort of how the revenue, and we usually supplement that with generous grants from different entities. When we first set up Edraak, and maybe sort of noteworthy to mention, it's actually, we got a very generous grant from the Crown Prince's Court in Abu Dhabi, and again supplemented by support from Kuwait and Lebanon. So that's sort of the grant funding that seeded the idea. But then sort of on top of that, we try to develop these revenue streams. In the future, potentially, for certain specializations and not access to the content, but access to certification, we might charge certain learners. But again, none of that is set in stone yet.
It strikes me listening to you, Nafez, is that you've got a number of different countries that are on board with you. And of course, there are many more Arab-speaking countries. Is it some level a notion of pacification and collaboration? Is that also an undercurrent mission? Because there's so much divisiveness, let's call it religious, nationalist, regional, money. Is this one way we can find a path to more cooperation?
I think that's a fantastic question. I think that there is an underlying idealistic pan-Arab notion at Edraak. I'd say, if you look at our team, it's based in Jordan, but really serving the larger Arab world. 40% of our learners come from Egypt. I'd say 80% of our learners are outside Jordan. And on our team itself, we've had people from Iraq, we have people from Egypt, Palestine, Jordanians, sort of different sort of members of the team. So there's that idealistic, I'd say, pan-Arab notion that's underlying everything that Edraak does, and sort of part of Her Majesty's vision to make this and really the platform for Arab learners online. The other thing that I say is we've also realized that through online learning platforms, by taking very specific courses, we're able to create cross-border or curate cross-border communities around areas of interest. So we did a course on the architecture and design of the modern Arab city, and you ended up having people from Jordan work with people in Syria, with people in Egypt, Bahrain, UAE, etc. all sort of work together around specific themes. And because sort of the Arab world is so diverse, it's very interesting to curate these communities. The mutual friend, that introduced us, we're working with him on a course around modern Arab art. And that's, an area where we think is obviously sort of much less political, and also, really able to curate these communities and build those bridges across these divides.
Cool. So you mentioned 40% of the learners are Egyptian. Can you share with us, you said roughly 2 million learners on your platform, a little bit more the socio-demographics about them, or female populations?
No, of course. So I'd say 40% of learners come from Egypt, and then sort of in terms of order, it's probably, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Morocco, Algeria, and sort of that fluctuates. I'd say the only thing that's really sort of been always there is that proportional to the sort of, there are 100 million people in Egypt, proportional to that, always the number one country where sort of learners come from has been Egypt. On top of that, in terms of average age, the average age of a learner on Edraak is around 21, 22 years old. It's 60% male, 40% female. Having said that, I will say that female learners complete courses at a little over double the rate that male learners do. So male learners maybe start as many courses as females, but females always, I'd say, complete at double that figure. The majority of learners on our platform, and again, this will change now that we've introduced the K-12 segment, do not have a bachelor's degree. I'd say maybe a little over 50% do not have a bachelor's degree. So for them, this is the first form of, in some cases, higher education or further education. So that's, I guess, sort of an overall overview of. Happy to dig deeper.
That's good. So you've got this platform, and clearly there are other MOOCs. What I'd be interested to know is what is the state of the art of the MOOC, and what is transferable in an Arab language platform as opposed to English speaking. Let's just keep it simple that way. And maybe what adaptations did you have to do in order to make it more appropriate for a pan-Arab world?
I think obviously there are a lot of maybe some of the cultural considerations that you need to take into mind, and some of those are simple as not speaking in dollars and speaking sort of more dirhams, dinars, currency. Some of it is sort of cultural in terms of the representation of men and women and sort of that interaction. But I'd say the more interesting or sort of nuances around some of the pedagogy and the level of the content. When we first started off, I think maybe also a bit idealistic, saying we want to bring the Harvards, MITs, Yales, Oxfords of the world to learners in the Arab world in Arabic. What we quickly realized is there's relatively strong positive correlation between your level of education and your mastery of the English language. So if you're able to do a Yale course or an MIT course, you can probably already do it in English. So if I'm going to offer this to learners in the Arab world, I need to sort of offer it at their level. To give a concrete example, we translated and offered this course with edX and MIT, Introduction to Physics. And we're working with some professors in Jordan to localize it. And the question to us is this like 2 years worth of content? We said, no, this is just 1 semester at MIT. And they're like, well, actually, we actually usually spend 2 years covering this kind of content. So, we still offered it as 1 semester, and, around 300 learners completed that course, but that was less than 3% of learners that had signed up for that course. So we learned from that and other experiences that, you need to segment and sequence the content and meet learners where they are. Yeah,
because presumably, just to break the people at MIT already coming in there, that's a category of person, the sort of 1,600 on the SATs and so on and so forth, and also, ready to become a bachelor, whereas a lot of these people maybe not have had access before, and so they're not quite as used to that speed.
Exactly, and I'd say, this is where I'm hoping, because one of the, I'd say, in my mind, more important criticisms of the online learning or MOOC movement, if we want to still use that term, is that the average typical learner already has a university degree, is white, male, etc. And I think that's partly because we're offering those courses that attract that higher level of education. Right. So we're broadening the gap between the haves and the have-nots. But if we're able to offer courses that are more at the level of the learners that need it, so more courses on creating a resume, more remedial physics education courses, etc., that's how you can use it to bridge the gap. The other interesting, I'd say, idea we've been thinking about is sort of trying to offer or use online learning for maybe sort of more at-risk or sort of, for example, refugee populations. And then sort of we've learned to break the automatic association between, somebody uses Facebook, WhatsApp, they can learn online. That's not true. If a learner in the Arab world has access to Facebook and WhatsApp, that's more often than not literally their internet. The internet to them is just Facebook and WhatsApp, and that's obviously not conducive to doing anything really online other than sort of maybe bi-directional communication. So you need to spend 2 to 3 hours, and that's sort of, we've introduced these workshops in collaboration with the Norwegian Refugee Council, CARE, UNHCR, to introduce them to how to use an email, how do you learn online, how do you search Google, because a lot of these people, when they actually go to search, they're searching in their Facebook feed. Mm-hmm. So they're obviously, it's not conducive to learning anything new.
Yeah. For sure. All right, let's just, and maybe this is general culture as well. When you're doing a site in Arabic, as opposed to English, of course, you have to read right to left. Mm-hmm. What are the other intricacies that are involved in making a website, much less a learning platform?
I'd say, unfortunately, I'd say, the internet, or sort of a big part of modern technology, is not set up in a way to accommodate anything that's not a Romance or a Latin-based language. So I'd say on the engineering side, there's a lot that you need to do sort of around Unicode support, to support characters and I'd say sort of data structures, perhaps, if I can use that, that are not, Latin script-based, etc. So that itself is its own sort of engineering feat. And then I'd say there are sort of visual and sort of design aspects that are more appealing to sort of Arabic-speaking learners than sort of Western learners. And then again, that sometimes, will differ by country, will differ by geography. Learners in the GCC will prefer certain visuals versus people in North Africa versus people in the Levant. So that's all sort of things that you need to factor in. So I'd say.
Just before we go on, so if you do this like mathematics 101, do you have to have an Egyptian flag, a Syrian flag? I mean, is there a localization at that level with images that are more appropriate and some vocabulary which may be more local?
That's a great question. So I think, fortunately, so far with the three curricula we're working on, the curriculum is relatively similar. The sequencing is different. So you maybe have to bring something earlier on in the semester, something maybe later on in the semester, maybe the beginning of the next academic year. But the content itself is relatively similar. In terms of the Arabic language, with the K-12, we're trying to stick as close as possible to sort of modern standard Arabic, but not sort of rigid modern standard Arabic, closer to what people would hear on the news or on the radio, so that they'd be more familiar.
More colloquial.
Yeah. A bit more familiar with it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
All right. So, in terms of the way you create your content, you said you have your own studio in house, which clearly means you can control what you're doing. Talk us through your process of creating this content. And hiring in the Harvard professor is one angle, but that's not feasible and certainly probably not sustainable at some level. How do you go about selecting, curating, ensuring that there is a high quality, and who's to know what is the best quality?
So it's not an easy question to answer, and I'd say there's a fair amount of subjectivity in that. But we'll usually, at the end of each year and the beginning of the following year, we'll refine or sort of update our content strategy. Figure out, what is the content we want based on employer demand, based on sort of the surveys and focus groups we've done with learners, to understand what content we want to invest in and sort of bring online. And sort of we're very keen to use as much of our funding as we can to create openly licensed content, that's sort of Creative Commons, because we see a big part of our role really in sort of making that market. And we can talk a bit more about that. One of the things we invested in is localizing and Arabizing the OpenEdX technology. And now we're seeing some of those dividends come back in other learners using the same technology to set up for-profit and not-for-profit entities and businesses. So once we've set that content strategy, then we have sort of a course management team that pretty much goes online through our existing networks at this point in relationships with these universities, because we work with a lot of people in the diaspora. They'll say, we need an expert on this subject that can deliver this content. And sort of, again, we'll have specific criteria for, is it a course that's geared more towards sort of the workplace and sort of how many years of experience that this person needs to have? Is it sort of a more an academic subject, and sort of does this person have the credentials? Have they presented before? And then it's about sort of also finding the balance between their ability to, or credibility to speak to the content, but then be able to present it really well. In certain instances, if the professor isn't able to be as engaging online, then you do want to sort of supplement that with the right level of animation, content, etc. And sometimes maybe bring in, step-in actors, etc. to deliver that content, as long as sort of vetted and validated. And then you sort of get to the actual, once you've done the course outline and the template, you go through the actual sort of media production process. We usually, film them. They fly into Jordan. We film them over sort of 4 to 5 days, edit it, launch it, market it, and get the learners.
Wow. So I didn't realize that was done in Jordan. But so you do have to fly people in, of course, and have.
I'd say in most cases, it's we have much more control over the quality of the content when it's in Jordan. We have in the past, and we continue to do, film in other countries. So we film quite often in Dubai, because that's, a very big hub where a lot of people are. We filmed in the US, we filmed here in the UK. But generally, in terms of cost effectiveness and quality, Jordan is, even with the cost of flights, is much better for us. And it also has a relatively interesting hub of talent around sort of media production, video production, that's easy to tap into.
And in terms of the profiles of these teachers, going back to the socio-demographics of the learners, what's the type of demographic you have? Because let's say that in K through 12, the general, in the West anyway, it's going to be mostly women who are teaching. Professors, of course, it skews differently. How does that look out for you?
I mean, I'd say it's quite varied, and I don't know if we've been sort of intentional beyond, trying to make sure that there's sort of a fair amount of women represented in a lot of niche areas. So whether it's STEM, whether it's computer science. And so we have an artificial intelligence course coming up. We're very keen, very lucky to be able to work with a professor at the Princess Sumaya University of Technology.
Nice.
We haven't I'd say, tried to sway it in any way. I'd say you're probably correct in terms of the K-12 content. A fair amount of it has been created and produced with women, but not intentionally.
When it comes to online education, I have, of course, been working in that space, and previously I used to do a lot more in real life education. But how do you gauge engagement ability of a teacher? You're probably vetting them from afar. You do a Skype message, and you want to do this, this is what we're going to take. And then at some point you're like, oh, this guy's really boring.
So we've been, very, very fortunate, to work with a lot of people that have, taught before. Some of them taught online before. Some of them, have spoken at public forums before. So it's really about doing a lot of background research as well, and ideally, and in most cases, people have given talks that you can, see on YouTube, and in this modern day and age, with Skype, etc., you can get a better feel for it. If somebody's in Jordan, or if we're able to attend, a conference or something that they're speaking at, we try to drop in to validate some of that. And again, it's not perfect. I'll say that openly. It's hit and miss. But so far, I do think we've been very, very fortunate to work with some really engaging, very thoughtful, and very, very smart Arabic speakers that are based in the region or based in the diaspora.
How do you quantify how many courses you have? Do you do by courses? By hours?
So we have, I think, a little over 100 courses on the platform at this point. On average, each course is probably 5 to 6 hours of learning, video learning. So that's 600 hours of video, almost, maybe a bit less than that. So that's one way we measure. But I guess what we're more interested in is how beneficial that is. So we look at the number of learners that engage in a course, and that's learners that attempt at least 2 or 3 problem sets at the end of the week, and learners don't always have to complete a course, because we've done a fair amount of surveying before learners start a course, and I'd say at least 50% of them join the course without the intention to complete. There's a specific segment or a specific week that they're interested in, and then obviously we're also interested in the number of learners that complete. So I'd say from the 2 million learners on the platform, a little under 200,000 have already completed certificates, specializations, etc., and those sort of unique specializations, so to say. So those are the general metrics we look about. Obviously, we also care about on a monthly basis. So on a monthly basis, as of now, we have, I'd say, 520, 530,000 monthly active users. So that's
nice.
What we're looking at. Yeah.
What about data? Is there a data play that you are looking at, and what sort of value is there in that data as far as you're concerned?
I think that there's a lot of value in that data, and I think that there's a lot of value in that data because it is a key to unlocking, which we still haven't done enough on, how do Arabic speakers learn online, going back to some of your previous questions. How do those learning patterns differ from, maybe somebody in the UK or somebody in the US, and how they learn online. I think Harvard, MIT have probably led the pack so far in analyzing some of, or at least making it public, and maybe Coursera and others have looked at that as well. But as far as I'm aware, Harvard and MIT have been done the most job in making some of that analysis public on their global learner base. But I haven't seen anything segmented, and I think we have we're sitting on a lot of data right now that we can look into and dig deeper into. We've tried to invest here and there in getting that out and look into it, but we've not succeeded. We're talking to some interesting partners in the US right now about how we can open source some of that data and let other researchers come in to make sure again all the privacy considerations are taken care of, but in a way that allows us to synthesize the analysis better.
Nifty. So last area of inquisition is the way you're marketing this. Because obviously it's not for profit, but there are many more people who could be out there. And how are you doing that, and what are your challenges about making it happen?
Yeah, I think that's a very relevant and important question, and I'd say we're very, very fortunate that we have a patron that's has a huge following online,
she certainly does,
and a great I'd say ability to push and market the content. I think that really, I'd say, helped us seed or create that momentum. And we've been trying to build on that momentum very actively, both in offline and online engagement. I'd say, online, Facebook is still king probably in the Arab world. We're starting to see a lot more engagement on Instagram, obviously. But I think given that this learning online, we want people to learn on the app on their phones, but also sort of take time on their desktops to learn. I'd say Facebook is a big marketing channel for us. We're also trying to do a lot of, I'd say, offline engagement. We have a Edraak ambassadors program that it's basically a volunteer-led program where people organize learning groups, study groups, get other people involved and engaged. So it's a mix of really online and offline. And yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you're really competing with everything else that's online, and we're also happy to say that you're also competing for the attention of other learning platforms in Arabic that are also online. And for us, again, the more content out there, the more choice, the better. That's what we're really trying to create.
Yeah, it's a co-opetition world. Tell us about how you animate that community. Are they cross frontiers? And do you have is it within the app? How do you keep them going?
So I'd say there are different efforts. I think gamification is something we've been looking at more and more. We've actually just recently done a course on the principles of gamification. How do you keep people who completes the most courses, who gets through the content first, who is showing one of the more interesting badges and sort of I guess metrics to look at for me is who is more supportive or most supportive on the forums in terms of helping their other learners. So I say it's about finding what excites them and sort of trying to incentivize people to do more of that.
See, so what does the future hold? What is Nafez's vision of the future?
I think very excited, obviously, and maybe a bit cliche about sort of what we can do with some of the artificial intelligence coming in and how we can use that. I think natural language processing in Arabic is still far behind where it is in maybe English and Chinese and other languages. But I think as we start making advances there, we'll be able to better use that, and especially for us, how do we use that for education and for learning? And I will say, I do hope that the future brings as collaborative and as exciting a future for the Arab world on the ground as it is online right now, because I do think it's a very exciting time for the internet online in the Arab world.
Sweet. So how, Nafez, can people track you down, participate if they feel like checking it out and or even sponsoring? What are the best ways to contact you?
Yeah, sure. So I'm pretty active on Twitter at Dakkak, Ndakkak. Our website, edraak.org, edraak.org. And of course, the Queen Rania Foundation's website, which is, I guess, shorter than all these. So it's just qrf.org.
All right, well, thank you for coming on the show, Nafez. Looking forward to following what you do. Obviously, I'm going to have to just brighten up my own Arabic if I want to know more. But anyway, pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for coming on.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for having listened to this recording of the Minter Dialogue Show. You'll find the show notes and other blog posts on minterdial.com. If you enjoyed the show, please like the handy Facebook button, or better yet, head over to iTunes to give a rating and review. But first, relax to Josh Sachs's Finger Paint.
Oh, fill me with all your